Every single day, you make dozens of decisions: who to trust, what risks to take, how to react to people. But what if I told you that many of those decisions aren't really yours? They're being quietly controlled by something from years ago, your childhood. The words you heard, the emotions you felt, and the experiences you went through as a child may still be shaping your choices today. And the most dangerous part is, you probably don't even realize it.
Most people believe they are making rational and independent decisions every single day, but the uncomfortable truth is that a large part of your choices, reactions, fears, and even ambitions are quietly shaped by something you rarely think about: your childhood. Long before you developed logic, long before you formed your adult identity, your brain was already collecting experiences that would silently program how you see the world. When you were a child, your mind functioned like a sponge, absorbing every emotional signal from your environment. The tone of your parents' voices, the way conflicts were handled at home, the affection you received or didn't receive, the criticism you heard, the encouragement you were given. All of these moments were not simply memories, they were instructions. Your brain stored them as patterns for survival. A child does not analyze life the way an adult does. A child simply adapts. If love was conditional, you learned that approval must be earned. If mistakes were punished harshly, you learned that failure is dangerous. If you were ignored, you may have learned that your voice does not matter. Over time, these lessons became invisible rules running in the background of your mind. As an adult, you may believe you are making logical choices, but in reality, many of your decisions are reactions to emotional programming created years ago. This hidden influence often appears in the most ordinary parts of life. Think about how you respond to criticism. Some people hear feedback and calmly analyze it, while others feel instantly attacked or humiliated. That difference rarely comes from the present moment. It usually comes from childhood experiences where criticism was tied to shame or rejection. The same pattern appears in relationships. People who grew up in emotionally stable homes often find it easier to trust others, while those who experienced inconsistency or emotional neglect may constantly fear abandonment, even when no real threat exists. Their mind learned early that stability is fragile. Because of this, the brain remains alert, searching for signs of rejection that might not actually be there. These reactions feel automatic because they are. They were trained into your nervous system during years when your brain was still forming its core structure. Neuroscience has shown that early experiences shape how the brain interprets safety and danger. A child who grows up in a calm environment learns that the world is generally safe, while a child raised around constant tension may grow up with a brain that is always prepared for conflict. This does not mean their childhood memories are always consciously remembered. In fact, many of these influences operate through the subconscious, the deeper layer of the mind that quietly filters reality before it reaches your conscious awareness. By the time you think you are making a decision, your brain has already processed emotional associations from the past. This is why two people can face the exact same situation and react completely differently. One might see opportunity while the other sees risk. One might trust quickly while another hesitates. These differences are not random. They are echoes of earlier experiences, shaping how each person interprets the present moment. The real power of childhood conditioning lies in its invisibility. Because these patterns were learned so early, they feel natural. They feel like who you are. Someone who grew up being told they were not good enough may carry that belief into adulthood without ever questioning it. They may work harder than everyone else, constantly trying to prove their worth, yet still feel an underlying fear of failure. Another person who received strong encouragement as a child may approach challenges with confidence, not because they are objectively more capable, but because their early experiences taught them that effort leads to support rather than humiliation. Over time, these internal beliefs guide major life decisions, career choices, friendships, romantic relationships, and even the risks you are willing to take. A person who subconsciously fears rejection may avoid opportunities that involve visibility or leadership. Someone who grew up feeling responsible for family stability may become overly focused on control, struggling to relax even in safe environments. These patterns can shape decades of behavior without the person realizing their origin. The mind simply repeats what it learned during its earliest training period. Childhood is essentially the stage where your brain builds its first model of reality. That model becomes the reference point for everything that follows. If affection was rare, love may feel unfamiliar or suspicious later in life. If independence was encouraged, you may feel comfortable exploring new possibilities. Even small moments can leave deep psychological imprints because children interpret experiences in very personal ways. A careless comment from a parent or teacher might be forgotten by the adult who said it, but to the child hearing it, the message can become a defining belief about their identity. The reason these beliefs are so powerful is that they were formed before you had the mental tools to challenge them. As a child, you assume the adults around you understand the world better than you do. Their reactions become your blueprint for interpreting reality. Once those blueprints are established, the mind begins to search for evidence that confirms them. This process, often unconscious, reinforces the original programming again and again. If you believe people cannot be trusted, your brain will notice every example that proves it, while ignoring moments of kindness. If you believe you must constantly prove your worth, you may push yourself into exhausting patterns of perfectionism. In this way, childhood experiences do not simply stay in the past, they continue influencing the lens through which you see the present. Understanding this hidden connection between childhood and adult behavior is the first step towards reclaiming control over your decisions. Most people spend years reacting to emotional triggers without realizing their source. They blame stress, difficult colleagues, or relationship problems, when in reality the deeper issue is an old pattern resurfacing in a new situation. The past quietly speaks through your instincts, your fears, and your expectations. It shapes what feels comfortable, what feels threatening, and what feels possible. The surprising truth is that many of the limits people place on themselves were not consciously chosen. They were inherited from early experiences that taught the brain how to survive. When you begin to recognize these invisible influences, something powerful happens. You start to see that your reactions are not random and your behavior is not fixed. They are patterns learned during a specific period of life. And anything that was learned can eventually be understood, questioned, and changed. But before that transformation can happen, you must first recognize how deeply the past is woven into the present. Your childhood may feel distant, but its lessons still echo in every decision you make, quietly guiding the direction of your life.
If childhood experiences quietly program the way your mind sees the world, the next question becomes even more important. How exactly do those early memories turn into patterns that control your decisions as an adult? The answer lies in the way the human brain learns through repetition and emotional intensity. When you were a child, your brain was not only absorbing information, it was building shortcuts, automatic responses designed to protect you and help you navigate your environment. Every strong emotional experience, whether positive or negative, acted like a lesson your brain stored for the future. Over time, these lessons became habits of thinking, habits of reacting, and habits of interpreting the behavior of others. You might believe your personality simply developed naturally, but in reality, much of it was shaped by these early emotional patterns. A child who grows up receiving encouragement whenever they try something new learns that exploration is safe and rewarding. That child often grows into an adult who is comfortable taking risks, starting new projects, or stepping into leadership roles. On the other hand, a child who was constantly criticized or compared to others may develop a deep fear of making mistakes. As an adult, that person might hesitate before taking opportunities, not because they lack ability, but because their brain associates mistakes with humiliation or rejection. The pattern is not logical, it is emotional. And emotional patterns are incredibly powerful because they operate faster than conscious thought. Before you can analyze a situation rationally, your brain has already scanned it for emotional familiarity. It asks a simple question: does this feel like something from the past that was safe, or something that once caused pain? Based on that quick evaluation, your body produces a reaction: confidence, anxiety, excitement, or avoidance. This is why many people repeatedly find themselves in the same types of situations throughout life. Some people keep choosing partners who treat them poorly. Others constantly sabotage their own progress, while some avoid conflict even when speaking up would benefit them. These behaviors are rarely random. They are echoes of earlier experiences shaping what the brain considers normal. The strange thing about human psychology is that the brain often prefers what is familiar over what is healthy. If someone grew up in an environment where emotional distance was common, closeness and vulnerability may actually feel uncomfortable to them later in life. Even when they meet someone who genuinely cares about them, their mind might interpret that closeness as unfamiliar territory. Instead of leaning into it, they may unconsciously create distance because their brain associates emotional safety with the patterns they experienced as a child. This is how old programming quietly repeats itself. Another powerful pattern formed in childhood is the belief system you carry about yourself. Every child is constantly trying to answer silent questions about their identity. Am I important? Am I capable? Do people value me? The answers to these questions are often shaped by the reactions of parents, teachers, and caregivers. When a child consistently receives signals that their ideas matter and their efforts are appreciated, they tend to develop a strong internal sense of worth. But when those signals are absent, or when the child is repeatedly told they are not good enough, the mind begins to form limiting beliefs. These beliefs do not stay confined to childhood. They become part of the inner voice that speaks to you throughout life. That voice may whisper doubts before you attempt something challenging. It may question your abilities even when others recognize your potential. Over time, these internal messages shape the kinds of goals you pursue and the risks you are willing to take. Many adults unknowingly live within boundaries created by beliefs they formed before they were even teenagers. A person who grew up feeling invisible may struggle to express their ideas in meetings even when they have valuable insights. Someone who was praised only for achievements may develop perfectionism, feeling constant pressure to perform at an unrealistic level. These patterns often feel like personality traits, but in reality, they are learned responses. They were developed because at some point in childhood, they helped the brain adapt to its environment. The problem is that the environment has changed, but the programming often remains the same. This can create a strange conflict inside the adult mind. One part of you may want growth, success, and healthier relationships, while another part quietly pulls you back toward familiar behaviors. That internal conflict explains why people sometimes understand what they should do logically, but still struggle to act differently emotionally. The past is not just a memory, it becomes a framework through which the present is interpreted. The brain keeps searching for confirmation of the patterns it already believes. When something happens that fits the old narrative, the brain highlights it as proof that the belief is true. When something contradicts the belief, it may be dismissed or overlooked. This selective attention reinforces the emotional programming again and again. Over years and decades, these patterns become deeply rooted. They shape how you handle stress, how you communicate in relationships, how you approach challenges, and even how you define success. Some people constantly push themselves because their childhood taught them that love must be earned through achievement. Others avoid pressure entirely because their early experiences associated pressure with fear or disappointment. Both behaviors can influence career choices, financial decisions, and personal relationships in ways that feel automatic rather than deliberate. The hidden nature of these patterns makes them particularly powerful. Because they operate beneath conscious awareness, people often attribute their decisions to circumstances without realizing the deeper psychological influence at work. Someone might say they simply prefer staying in their comfort zone without realizing their comfort zone was defined years earlier by childhood experiences. Another person might believe they just happen to attract the wrong types of friends or partners, when in reality, their subconscious is guiding them toward what feels familiar. This does not mean that childhood permanently determines your future, but it does mean that understanding these patterns is essential if you want to change them. The moment you begin to see how early experiences shaped your beliefs, reactions, and expectations, those patterns start to lose some of their invisible power. Awareness acts like a spotlight in a dark room. It reveals the structures that were always there but remained unnoticed. Once you recognize them, you gain the ability to question whether those patterns still serve you, or whether they are simply outdated survival strategies from a time when you had far less control over your environment. In many ways, adulthood is not just about gaining freedom from external limitations, it is also about gradually recognizing the internal programs that influence your behavior. Some of those programs can be helpful, providing resilience and motivation. Others may quietly limit your potential, encouraging fear, self-doubt, or emotional distance. The key difference between someone who remains trapped by these patterns and someone who grows beyond them is awareness. When you begin to understand the hidden influence of childhood on your decisions, you take the first step toward reclaiming the power to shape your future consciously, rather than unconsciously repeating the past.
One of the most powerful ways childhood continues to influence your decisions is through emotional triggers. These are moments when a present-day situation suddenly produces a reaction that feels far stronger than the situation itself deserves. You might feel intense anger over a small disagreement, deep anxiety before a simple conversation, or overwhelming fear when facing a new opportunity. In those moments, it often feels like the reaction is about what is happening right now. But in reality, the present situation may simply be activating emotional memories that were formed many years ago. Childhood is the time when your brain learns what safety and danger feel like. Because children rely heavily on the people around them, their minds become extremely sensitive to emotional signals. A harsh tone, a disappointed look, or repeated criticism can teach a child that certain situations are threatening, even if those situations are normal parts of life. The brain stores these emotional memories not just as thoughts, but as physical responses in the nervous system. That is why years later, a similar situation can trigger the same emotional reaction automatically. Your mind may know that the present moment is different, but your nervous system reacts as if the past is happening again. This is the hidden power of emotional triggers. They collapse time, bringing old feelings into new situations without warning. Imagine a person who grew up in a household where expressing opinions often led to arguments or punishment. As a child, they may have learned that speaking honestly could create conflict or rejection. Their brain recorded that experience as a form of danger. As an adult, when they find themselves in a meeting where they need to share their ideas, they may suddenly feel nervous, hesitant, or even silent. On the surface, it might look like a lack of confidence, but beneath the surface, the brain is simply trying to avoid a situation that once felt threatening. Another person might have grown up feeling ignored or overlooked. For them, moments of attention and recognition may feel incredibly important because those experiences were rare during childhood. As adults, they might become extremely sensitive to signs of rejection, interpreting small changes in tone or behavior as evidence that someone is losing interest in them. The reaction can feel intense because the brain is not just responding to the present, it is responding to years of earlier emotional experiences. These triggers can also appear in relationships. Many people find themselves reacting strongly to their partners in ways that seem confusing or disproportionate. A small misunderstanding might suddenly turn into a deep argument, or a harmless comment might feel like a personal attack. Often, the emotional intensity is connected to old experiences rather than the current situation. If someone grew up feeling that love was unstable or conditional, they might react strongly whenever they sense distance from someone they care about. Their mind may interpret that distance as the beginning of abandonment, even if the other person simply needs space or time. The emotional trigger activates the fear learned long ago. This process happens incredibly quickly, often faster than conscious thought. Before you can analyze what is happening logically, your brain has already produced an emotional response. That response then influences your decisions, what you say, how you behave, and whether you approach or avoid the situation entirely. Over time, repeated reactions like this shape patterns in your life. A person who becomes anxious during conflict might start avoiding difficult conversations altogether. Someone who feels threatened by criticism might react defensively instead of listening carefully. These behaviors are not random personality flaws. They are protective responses created during childhood when the brain was learning how to survive emotionally challenging environments. Emotional triggers can also influence the risks you are willing to take. Many adults hesitate before pursuing new opportunities, not because the opportunity is objectively dangerous, but because it activates old fears of failure or embarrassment. A child who was mocked for mistakes may grow into an adult who avoids situations where mistakes are possible. Their brain interprets the possibility of failure as a threat to their identity. On the other hand, someone who grew up in an environment where mistakes were treated as normal steps in learning may approach challenges with curiosity rather than fear. The difference lies not in the present opportunity, but in the emotional lessons learned during childhood. These triggers can even shape the way people see themselves. When a situation activates an old emotional memory, it can also activate the beliefs that were formed during that time. If a person once believed they were not good enough, moments of difficulty may quickly reinforce that belief. Instead of seeing the situation as a temporary challenge, they may interpret it as proof that the old belief is true. This is how childhood experiences can continue influencing self-confidence decades later. The brain simply follows the patterns it learned early in life. What makes emotional triggers so powerful is that they feel completely real in the moment. When you experience a strong reaction, your mind naturally assumes the reaction must be justified by the present situation. Rarely do people pause to ask whether their feelings might be connected to something deeper. As a result, many adults spend years reacting to old emotional patterns without recognizing their origin. They might describe themselves as naturally anxious, overly sensitive, or easily angered, without realizing that those tendencies were shaped by earlier experiences. But understanding emotional triggers can be incredibly freeing. When you begin to recognize that a strong reaction might be connected to the past rather than the present, it creates space between the emotion and your decision. Instead of immediately reacting, you can start observing what is happening inside your mind. You might notice the familiar feeling of fear, tension, or defensiveness and realize that it has appeared before in similar situations. That awareness is the first step toward changing the pattern. Once you recognize the trigger, you can begin questioning the automatic response that follows it. Is the situation truly dangerous, or is your brain responding to an old memory? Are you reacting to the person in front of you or to someone from your past who created the original emotional imprint? These questions allow you to step outside the automatic programming and make decisions more consciously. The goal is not to eliminate emotional reactions completely. That would be impossible and unnecessary.
Emotions are an essential part of human experience. The goal is to understand where those emotions come from so they no longer control your decisions without your awareness. When you learn to recognize emotional triggers, you begin separating the present moment from the echoes of the past. Gradually, this awareness weakens the automatic patterns that once felt unavoidable.
Situations that once triggered intense reactions may start to feel more manageable because your brain is learning that the present is not the same as the past. In this way, understanding emotional triggers becomes a powerful step toward reclaiming control over your behavior. The past may still influence your mind, but it no longer has to dictate your actions. And as that awareness grows, the patterns formed during childhood begin to loosen their grip on the decisions that shape your life. By the time most people reach adulthood, the patterns created in childhood have been repeated for years, sometimes even decades. These patterns influence how you react to stress, how you communicate with others, and how you see your own abilities. Because they have been part of your life for so long, they can feel permanent, almost like they're part of your identity. But the truth is that these patterns are not fixed. They are learned responses, and anything that was learned can eventually be changed. The challenge is that change requires awareness, patience, and the willingness to question beliefs that once felt unquestionable. Many people spend their entire lives reacting automatically to emotional habits formed in childhood. They avoid certain situations without fully understanding why, or they repeat the same relationship patterns again and again. But the moment you begin to recognize the influence of your past, something important shifts. You move from living inside the pattern to observing the pattern. That shift alone is powerful because it creates distance between your automatic reaction and your conscious decision. Instead of reacting instantly, you begin to notice what is happening inside your mind. You start recognizing familiar thoughts, familiar fears, and familiar emotional responses. When you see these patterns clearly, they begin to lose some of their control over you. Awareness acts like a spotlight, revealing mechanisms that were previously hidden in the background of your mind. Once the pattern becomes visible, you can start questioning it. For example, if you notice that criticism instantly makes you defensive, you might ask yourself where that reaction originally came from. Perhaps as a child, criticism felt like rejection or humiliation, so your brain learned to protect itself by reacting strongly. But in adulthood, not every form of criticism is meant to harm you. Sometimes it is simply information or feedback. When you recognize this difference, you give yourself the opportunity to respond differently. Instead of reacting automatically, you pause and evaluate the situation more calmly. This pause is small but extremely important because it interrupts the old cycle that once controlled your behavior. Over time, repeating this pause gradually rewires the way your brain responds to similar situations. Change does not happen instantly because the patterns formed during childhood were reinforced through years of repetition. The brain prefers what is familiar, even if that familiarity limits growth. That is why stepping outside old patterns can feel uncomfortable at first. If you spent your childhood avoiding conflict, speaking up might feel unnatural. If you grew up believing you were not capable, pursuing ambitious goals may feel intimidating. But discomfort does not necessarily mean something is wrong. Often, it simply means your brain is encountering a situation that does not match its old programming. When you push through that discomfort carefully and consistently, your mind begins to update its understanding of what is safe and possible. This process is sometimes called psychological rewiring because the brain literally strengthens new neural connections when you repeatedly practice new behaviors. Each time you challenge an old belief, each time you respond differently to a familiar trigger, you are teaching your brain a new lesson. Instead of repeating the emotional rules formed in childhood, you are gradually building new ones based on your present experiences. One of the most powerful steps in breaking childhood patterns is questioning the beliefs you carry about yourself. Many adults operate under internal narratives that were formed very early in life. Some people quietly believe they are not intelligent enough, not attractive enough, or not deserving of success. These beliefs often originate from repeated messages heard during childhood, whether directly through words or indirectly through behavior. A child who is constantly compared to others may internalize the idea that they are always falling short. A child who receives little emotional support may grow up believing their needs are not important. These beliefs can become so deeply rooted that people rarely stop to ask whether they are actually true. They simply assume the belief reflects reality. But beliefs are not facts. They are interpretations shaped by past experiences. When you begin to examine these beliefs carefully, you may discover that many of them were created during moments when you had limited understanding of the world. A child interprets situations differently than an adult. What once felt like proof of personal failure may now be seen as a misunderstanding, a difficult environment, or a reflection of someone else's limitations rather than your own. Recognizing this difference allows you to rewrite the story you tell yourself about who you are. Another important part of breaking childhood patterns is learning to separate past emotions from present situations. Emotional triggers often make the past feel immediate, as if the old experience is happening again. But with awareness, you can start distinguishing between what belongs to the present and what belongs to the past. When a strong reaction appears, instead of assuming it must be justified by the current situation, you can pause and ask yourself a different question. Is this reaction about what is happening now, or is it connected to something older? This simple question can create space between the emotion and your action. That space allows your rational mind to participate in the decision instead of letting the emotional reflex take complete control. Over time, repeating that space weakens the automatic responses that once felt unavoidable. It is also important to understand that healing childhood patterns does not mean blaming the past or holding resentment toward the people who shaped those experiences. Most parents and caregivers simply pass down the emotional patterns they themselves learned earlier in life. Recognizing the influence of childhood is not about assigning blame, it's about gaining clarity. When you understand where your patterns came from, you gain the power to decide whether those patterns still serve you. Some of them may still be useful, helping you stay disciplined, cautious, or empathetic. Others may no longer be necessary, and may even hold you back from becoming the person you want to be. Growth happens when you consciously choose which patterns to keep and which to replace. This process takes time, and it requires patience with yourself. Decades of emotional conditioning cannot disappear overnight, but each moment of awareness, each decision to respond differently, slowly changes the direction of your behavior. The brain is remarkably adaptable throughout life. New experiences can reshape old beliefs, new relationships can challenge old fears, and new achievements can weaken old doubts. The more you expose yourself to experiences that contradict the limitations created in childhood, the more your brain updates its understanding of reality. Gradually, situations that once felt threatening begin to feel manageable. Goals that once seemed impossible start to feel achievable, and reactions that once felt automatic begin to feel like choices rather than obligations. This is how people gradually move from being controlled by the emotional programs of their past to consciously shaping their future. The past may still exist as a memory, but it no longer dictates every decision. Instead, it becomes something you understand, rather than something that unconsciously controls you. And in that understanding lies the real freedom to build a life defined not by the limitations of childhood, but by the possibilities of the present.
Understanding how childhood shaped your beliefs, reactions, and emotional triggers leads to one final and powerful question. If the past has influenced so many of your decisions, can you truly take control of your future? The answer is yes, but it requires a shift in awareness that many people never make. The moment you begin to recognize the hidden patterns guiding your behavior, you move from unconscious reaction to conscious choice. For most of your life, your mind has been running on programs written during your earliest experiences. Those programs were not created intentionally. They were simply the brain's way of adapting to the environment it grew up in.
As a child, you did not have the power to change that environment, so your mind learned to survive within it. But adulthood brings a new ability, the power to observe your own thoughts and decide whether they still represent the truth of your present life. This ability is what separates a person who remains trapped by their past from someone who learns from it and grows beyond it. The first step in reclaiming control is recognizing that the feelings you experience in difficult situations are not always accurate reflections of reality. Emotions are powerful signals, but they are often shaped by memories rather than the present moment. When you feel sudden fear, anger, or self-doubt, your mind may be reacting to an old emotional pattern rather than the situation in front of you. Instead of immediately accepting that feeling as truth, you can pause and examine it. Ask yourself what exactly triggered the reaction. Is the situation genuinely threatening, or does it remind you of something from your past? This moment of reflection may seem small, but it is one of the most powerful mental skills you can develop. It interrupts the automatic cycle in which the past silently controls the present. Each time you pause before reacting, you give yourself the opportunity to choose a different response. Over time, those new responses begin to reshape the emotional patterns in your brain. This is how the process of change begins, not through dramatic transformations, but through small moments of awareness repeated again and again. Another important part of reclaiming control is redefining the story you tell yourself about your life. Many adults unknowingly carry narratives that were created during childhood. They may believe they are naturally shy, unlucky, incapable, or undeserving of success. These narratives often feel permanent because they have been repeated internally for so many years. But when you examine them closely, you may discover that they were formed during moments when you had very little information about the world. A child who struggles in school might conclude that they are not intelligent, even if the real issue was lack of support or a teaching style that did not match the way they learn. A child who grows up in a tense household might believe that conflict is dangerous, even if adult relationships can handle disagreement in healthy ways. As you grow older and gain new experiences, you have the opportunity to update these narratives. Instead of defining yourself by the limitations of your past, you can begin defining yourself by the choices you make in the present. This does not mean ignoring your childhood or pretending it had no impact. Your early experiences will always be part of your story, but they do not have to determine the direction of the chapters that come next. Many people discover that once they start questioning their old beliefs, they begin seeing opportunities that once felt impossible. A person who once believed they were not capable of leadership may slowly realize that the belief was based on early criticism rather than their true potential. Someone who once feared rejection may begin forming deeper relationships once they understand where that fear originated. Each new experience that contradicts an old belief weakens the influence of the past and strengthens your confidence in the present. This is how real personal growth happens, not through denying the past, but through understanding it and choosing not to be limited by it. Reclaiming control also requires compassion toward yourself. Many people judge their reactions harshly when they realize how much childhood experiences still influence them. They may feel frustrated that they continue repeating patterns they want to change. But these patterns developed when your brain was trying to protect you in situations where you had little control. The behaviors that once helped you adapt may now feel limiting, but they were originally created as survival strategies. When you recognize this, it becomes easier to approach change with patience instead of criticism. Self-compassion allows you to acknowledge your patterns without feeling ashamed of them. It reminds you that growth is a gradual process. Each moment of awareness, each attempt to respond differently is a step forward. Over time, those steps accumulate into meaningful transformation. As you become more conscious of your internal patterns, you may notice that your decisions start to feel different. Situations that once triggered automatic reactions may begin to feel more manageable. Instead of reacting immediately, you may find yourself pausing, reflecting, and choosing a response that aligns with your goals rather than your fears. This shift represents a profound change in how your mind operates. Instead of being controlled by emotional programs written long ago, you are actively shaping the way you think and behave in the present. The more you practice this awareness, the more natural it becomes. Eventually, the patterns created in childhood begin to lose their invisible power over your decisions. Your past remains part of your history, but it no longer defines your future. In many ways, understanding the influence of childhood is not about blaming the past, but about recognizing the incredible adaptability of the human mind. The same brain that once learned limiting beliefs can also learn new perspectives. The same emotional system that once reacted automatically can develop greater awareness and balance. This ability to grow and adapt is one of the most powerful qualities of human nature. When you realize that your behavior is shaped by patterns rather than fixed traits, you realize that change is always possible. The decisions you make today can slowly reshape the direction of your life. And while your childhood may have written the first chapters of your story, it does not have the power to write the ending unless you allow it. The moment you become aware of how the past influences your present, you gain something incredibly valuable: the freedom to choose differently.